Mike before, he didn't use the word, but he was talking about the people and having the expertise. And a theme that I hear all the time is one of management, making sure that the management has an idea of what it wants to do. The other topic that comes up again and again seems to be one of IP. And there's lots of intellectual property. Is your idea protected? What have you? And there seems to be all sorts of different opinions on this, on whether IP is a valuable thing to have or not a valuable thing to have. I was talking to Robert about this before, and you had some thoughts. In the context of NICTA, I'd imagine that IP would be vital.
Absolutely. IP is a critical part of establishing value in an entity, but it depends what you're looking at IP for and what kind of IP it is. So intellectual property covers actually a range of different things, everything from a patent that you might lodge, and there are rules of country by country about what is allowed to be patented. A patent is nothing more than a legal monopoly over a certain area, and gives you a right to go to potentially a very expensive court case. And just talked to the CSIRO about that. It took them 15 years to litigate and finally be successful on their wireless patent technology. Patents are just one form of IP. Know-how and trademarks, etc., are other forms of IP, and they're very important. The know-how that you and your team can weave into your business are pretty critical. I'm not going to profess any advice on whether anything anybody's got is protectable or not. There are some really good lawyers in Australia who will cover IP and will give you some pretty inexpensive advice around the quality of your IP. US lawyers, by the way, are even better at IP because typically there are some great ones in the valley that have seen how IP can be gained, and so they will come at solving IP protection issues that you may have in a very different way. But IP can be a really valuable asset in your business if what you want to do is have, in particular, a trade sale exit somewhere down the road. If you can have something that's called, I think, a system-wide patent or a system-wide set of patents where you effectively block off potential competitors from going down what might be a valuable path in the market, or mobile communications or mobile content is a great one, where the market is continuing to evolve. How content and data is going to get distributed. There are a lot of bottlenecks that are going to occur in that sector over the next 5 to 10 years. If you can block off a path because you know that area technically very well, then there are some incumbents who are going to want to come and talk to you, and then you can start adding some value to your business in the sale process because you own a monopoly in this space.
You've introduced the segue for me, thank you very much, which is one of exit strategies. So we've mentioned management, we've mentioned IP. Exit spice at the end. Interesting, before we get that, you were talking to me a little bit about IP and whether you think IP is important when you invest in an organisation or not. Was that you before, Ilkka?
Certainly here in Australia, IP is very important for early stage investors and VCs. It helps protect your investment. On the other side, IP is also a bit of a burden, it needs to be protected, and that costs a lot of money. And so certainly in the European context, and I talk specifically in the mobile phone space, where IP is contested fairly rigorously between what I would call the Anglo-European American cartel versus the Japanese versus the Chinese, and there are always IP wars going on in that space. And in that type of business, IP is a bit of a hindrance because it takes away from management. So what tends to happen, for example, in Miri Group, the companies we acquired, we ended up with over 300 primary IPs. We packaged all those up and sold them into an IP bank. So we don't have to spend money protecting those and not be distracted from the business. We can just focus on the business and make good money out of the IP that we happen to buy into that business. We were fortunate that we've got probably one of Europe's best IP lawyers involved in that business, based out of Paris, and so that helps. So different investors in different sectors take different view of it in different countries, but I can, from an Australian perspective, I think most investors would like to see some patentable IP. Does de-risk it for them, but in saying that, when we launched Engine, we had no IP whatsoever. It was open platforms, and it was a first to market mover advantage was our story when we took that to market, and we were still able to raise money, considerable amounts of money to get that going without having IP in that business.
As a question to the entire panel. Have you ever had this happen, or how would you deal with this? Someone approaches you, they say that they have a wonderful idea, but they're reluctant to tell you about it at all, because it's so good they don't want you to steal it, yet they still want you to invest. Or they've got say like a non-disclosure agreement or something like that. Maybe Mike here. Has that ever happened to you, and what's your response to that?
Yeah, that happens on the VC side. That happens all the time. So I just say, first of all, if someone's saying I've got a great idea, but I don't want to tell you about it, then I just say, fine, I'm not really interested. The idea itself is rarely, and I would venture to say never, real value in a business. So it's actually, shows a poor judgment to me. So I tend to just let's too short. Just move on. In terms of the NDA, actually the VC industry has set up a kind of standard NDA that we will sign, but we typically won't do that until we're fairly far along with someone. And so just kind of balancing those 2 points, what you typically do is have your first meeting, maybe a couple of meetings, and then when you actually get into, let's sit down with your technical people and go through, what the IP or secret sauce is, then before you do that, or before talking to customers, something like that, you would, willingly sign an NDA.
Because it's very rare that anyone's going to ever be even in a position to rip off a business concept. It's usually the defensible idea or the secret sauce or the know-how or the IP behind it that's of the true value.
What's, no, yes? I would say yes and no. What is hard is if you have, especially in VC space, or if you've got a pretty sophisticated angel who's sort of investing in a particular sector, is they could well be looking at multiple companies in the space, and I think, or maybe they've already invested in a company that's similar to yours, and you approach them maybe with the idea that they could hook you up with this other company or what it is. You've got to actually be a little bit careful about what you are willing to say. So it's very hard to generalize across the situation, but I can see, especially now being, on the side that I am, I actually went and met with Honeywell today, who's, in some ways a big competitor to us, but potentially a big partner, and you just, be quite conscious of the potential disclosure risks at any time, even with an NDA.